Before the world knew his name, before kings bowed and armies marched, there was only a child alone in the stillness of a temple. The lamps burned in the darkness, the silence pressing heavy against the night. Then it happened. A voice broke through the shadows, not the voice of a priest, not the sound of a man, but the very voice of God. This is the powerful story of Samuel in the Bible, the boy who heard God's voice. His journey did not begin in greatness, but in desperation. It began with a barren mother's cry, with the ache of unanswered prayers, and the silent longing of a woman who refused to give up. Out of her sorrow came a child who would change the destiny of a nation. Samuel's story is one of obedience and courage, but also of heartbreak and loss. He was a prophet, a judge, and a kingmaker. He would see the rise of leaders and the fall of kings. He would carry the weight of God's message even when it broke his own heart. His life reminds us that God does not always call the strong, the powerful, or the prepared. He calls the listening, the willing, and the faithful. Long before Samuel's name was spoken, the story began with silence, a silence that tormented Hannah's heart. She was a woman who longed for a child, but year after year, her womb remained empty. Each passing season was a reminder of what she did not have, and each celebration of life around her cut deeper into her soul. In those days, barrenness was not only a personal grief, but also a public shame. Hannah carried both. Her rival mocked her. Her spirit was crushed. Yet in the bitterness of her soul, she did not turn from God, she ran toward him. One day, at the temple in Shiloh, Hannah fell to her knees. Her tears soaked the ground as she poured out her heart before the Lord. She prayed silently, her lips moving but no sound escaping, so deep was her anguish. She made a vow, not for her own glory, but for God's. "If you give me a son, I will give him back to you all the days of his life." In that sacred moment, heaven listened. God, who had closed her womb, remembered her cry. Her pain was not wasted, her tears not unseen. The silence that once haunted her was about to be broken by the laughter of a child. Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel, which means, God has heard. Every time she whispered his name, she remembered the faithfulness of the Lord. Samuel was not just an answer to prayer. He was a living testimony that God sees the broken-hearted and answers in his perfect time. But Hannah's faith did not stop with gratitude. True to her vow, when Samuel was weaned, she brought him to the temple. A mother holding the child she had begged God for, now releasing him into God's hands. Her arms let go, but her heart never would. She entrusted her beloved son to Eli the priest. It was a sacrifice few could make. But Hannah understood something powerful. The child given by God must be returned to God. The temple in Shiloh became the place where Samuel's story would take root. Though he was only a child, he was already marked by God. Year after year, Hannah would return to Shiloh, bringing Samuel a robe she had carefully woven. Each stitch carried a mother's love, each thread a reminder that while she had released him, she had not forgotten him. The temple became Samuel's classroom, his home, his sacred ground. He grew up under Eli's guidance, learning the ways of worship, the rhythm of sacrifice, and the holiness of God's presence. Even as a child, his heart leaned toward obedience. Unlike the sons of Eli, who corrupted the priesthood with greed and dishonor, Samuel's life was marked by purity and devotion. The scriptures say, "The boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with people." Already, the unseen hand of God was shaping him, preparing him for a destiny greater than anyone around him could imagine. But the days were dark. Visions and messages from God were rare in those times. Israel was drifting, the priesthood was stained by corruption, and the people were longing for direction. Into that silence, Samuel was being prepared. The boy who had been given by a mother's vow was about to discover that he was chosen by the voice of the Almighty. Night had fallen over Shiloh. The temple was quiet, its halls resting in deep stillness. The sacred lamp still burned, casting a warm glow in the sanctuary. Samuel lay on his mat, a child in the service of the Lord, unaware that heaven was about to break through his silence. Then it came a voice calling his name, Samuel. Startled, the boy rose quickly. He ran to Eli, believing the old priest had called him. But Eli, weary with age, shook his head. "I did not call you. Go and lie down again." Samuel returned to his place, his heart steady but puzzled. Moments later, the voice called again, "Samuel." Once more, he rushed to Eli, only to hear the same reply. A third time it happened, the same call, the same response. Confusion filled the boy's mind. Why did he keep hearing his name in the night? It was then Eli understood what Samuel could not. This was no ordinary call, it was the Lord himself. The God who had been silent for so long was now speaking to a child. Eli instructed him gently, "If he calls again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" Samuel returned to his bed, his young heart trembling with awe. Then the moment came again. The Lord stood near and called as before, "Samuel, Samuel." This time the boy responded. His voice was small, yet filled with surrender. "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And God spoke. The message Samuel received was heavy, announcing judgment on Eli's house for their corruption. It was not a comforting word, but a sobering one. From that night forward, Samuel was no longer just a boy in the temple, he was God's chosen prophet. The silence that had rested over Israel was broken. The Lord had found his servant, and his word would once again flow through a human voice. From the night God first spoke to Samuel, his life was never the same. The boy who once served quietly in the temple grew into a prophet whose words carried divine weight. Scripture tells us, "The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground." Every message Samuel delivered came with power and certainty. His reputation spread across Israel until every tribe recognized him as God's chosen messenger. But Samuel was not only a prophet. He was also a judge, a leader who guided Israel in times of crisis. When the Philistines gathered against Israel, the people trembled with fear. They turned to Samuel, pleading for his prayers. And Samuel, faithful as always, interceded. He offered a sacrifice and cried out to the Lord on their behalf. The answer came swiftly. As the Philistines advanced, the Lord thundered from heaven, throwing the enemy into confusion. Israel rose with courage, striking down their foes. It was not the strength of their armies that saved them, it was the power of God through the prayers of his prophet. After the victory, Samuel set up a stone as a memorial. He called it Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." It was a marker of God's faithfulness, a reminder that Israel's survival depended not on kings or weapons, but on obedience to the Lord. For years, Samuel traveled from town to town, judging the people with wisdom, settling disputes, and urging them to remain faithful. Under his leadership, Israel experienced peace. Yet as Samuel grew older, the people began to long for something he could not give them, an earthly king. Samuel had led Israel faithfully for decades. He had judged with integrity, prayed with passion, and spoken with authority. Yet as his hair turned grey and his strength began to fade, the people grew restless. They saw the nations around them powerful, organized, led by kings who marched at the head of armies. Israel longed for the same. They came to Samuel with a demand that pierced his heart. "Appoint for us a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." It was more than a request for leadership, it was a rejection of Samuel's calling, and, far worse, a rejection of God's kingship over Israel. Samuel felt the sting deeply. He had given his life to serve these people, and now they wanted someone else to take his place. He turned to the Lord in grief. And the Lord answered with words both heavy and consoling, "It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king." Still, Samuel did not hold back. He warned the people of what a king would bring: taxes, forced labor, sons taken for war, daughters pressed into service, freedom surrendered for power. His words painted a sobering picture of the cost of their desire. But the people would not listen. Their voices rose with stubborn resolve. "No, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations." Samuel prayed again, and God gave his answer: "Listen to them and give them a king." It was a devastating moment for the prophet. He had spent his life calling Israel to be different, set apart, holy unto the Lord. Now they were choosing sameness with the nations, chasing what looked powerful but would only lead to pain. God revealed his choice for Israel's first king, Saul, a tall, handsome young man searching for his father's lost donkeys when destiny found him. When Samuel secretly anointed Saul with oil, the Spirit of God came upon him with power, transforming him from a simple farmer into a man capable of leading a nation. For a time, it seemed perfect. Saul led Israel to victory after victory, his reputation growing with each triumph. The people who had demanded a king were thrilled. Samuel, watching from the sidelines, allowed himself to hope, but power revealed Saul's character, and his character had fatal flaws. Pride crept into his heart like poison. He began making decisions based on popular opinion rather than divine command, trusting his own wisdom rather than seeking the Lord's guidance. The breaking point came when Saul directly disobeyed God's explicit command during battle with the Amalekites. When Samuel confronted him, Saul made excuses and blamed others. Samuel delivered one of Scripture's most devastating rebukes. "To obey is better than sacrifice. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." As Samuel turned to leave, Saul grabbed his robe in desperation, and the fabric tore. Samuel looked at the torn cloth and said with finality, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and given it to one better than you." God's voice came to Samuel again, "Fill your horn with oil and go to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." The journey felt like walking toward the edge of the world. When Samuel arrived, Jesse presented 7 sons, each impressive. But God rejected them all. "Do not consider appearance or height. The Lord looks at the heart." "Are these all your sons?" Samuel asked. "Well, there is the youngest, but he's tending sheep." When David walked in from the fields, dust on his clothes and the smell of sheep clinging to his hair, Samuel's breath caught. This was no impressive warrior, this was a boy. But the Spirit of the Lord confirmed, "Rise and anoint him, this is the one." As oil poured over David's head, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him with power. In that humble home in Bethlehem, surrounded by sheep and simplicity, the future king of Israel received his calling. Samuel had once again been God's instrument in choosing a leader. When death finally came for Samuel, all Israel mourned. From Dan to Beersheba, the cry went up, "The prophet is dead." They buried him at Ramah, where he had been born, where Hannah had raised him, where his journey with God began. Samuel's death was not an ending, it was a graduation. He had completed his assignment, finished his race, kept the faith. The boy who had once heard God's voice in the darkness had become the man who never stopped listening. Thousands of years have passed, yet Samuel's story continues to resonate. His mother's prayer reminds us that God sees every tear and often works his greatest miracles through our deepest pain. His childhood shows us that God can use anyone to accomplish his will. His integrity challenges us in an age of compromise. Most importantly, Samuel's life demonstrates that hearing God's voice is not reserved for prophets, it is the birthright of every believer. In a world that grows louder by the day, we need the quiet confidence of those who know how to listen. The boy who heard God's voice became the man who never stopped listening. His legacy lives on in every heart that chooses faithfulness over fame, obedience over opportunity, the eternal over the temporal. The same God who called to Samuel in the darkness is calling to us today. The question is not whether he is speaking, but whether we are truly listening. The voice that shaped nations and crowned kings is still echoing through eternity, still seeking hearts that will respond, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And when we learn to listen, truly listen, we discover that Samuel's story never really ended. It simply passed the torch to a new generation, trusting that the voice he faithfully proclaimed would continue to echo until the end of time, calling new servants into the greatest adventure of all. A life lived in perfect harmony with the heart of God. Subscribe to this channel if this story has blessed you.